Okay, there we go. Because I take these, I don't know if you know this, Shaba, but I take these and put them online, and then they're available for people who are interested reading this. And the way I start, I get to use you as a guinea pig. Everyone else knows this already, but the way I like to start is asking whether there are things in the reading that you were so excited about, that you felt were so important, that you just can't wait to talk about that part. That'd be a shame if we didn't get to that, and you'll just be antsy, waiting to talk about that while we talk about other more trivial things. So if anyone has something they just can't wait to talk about, now's the time to volunteer that. You can raise your hand, or you can wave it in the window and I'll try to see it. Yes, Eric, I see you.
Yeah, there's a lot, but one thing that I wanted clarification about was on page 112.
Okay.
He makes a distinction between empiricism and Socratic questioning as if they are substantively distinct. And I just didn't quite grasp how.
Why don't you read the quote, Eric, while we find our way to the text? And there he goes.
Okay, 112. Where does he say? Yeah, okay, so it's right at the start of the second full paragraph. Now, the modern empirical sciences, on the one hand, with their mathematical instrumentalization, and on the other hand, the Socratic thinking that constantly questions things, seeking the good, with an attitude of not knowing, these are two ways of encountering reality that do not seem to go together. And that's where I'm kind of like, how do they not necessarily go together?
Right. Okay, good question.
Well, yeah.
John, go ahead.
Yeah. Yes, Eric. I think it's this is crucial. This is just you put your finger on a very essential point here between modern, post 17th century thinking and Greek thinking, whereas we see the reason why we are why we are in danger is because we don't recognize the level of our ignorance, because science has sort of anesthetized us into thinking that through empiricism we can know everything we need to know, and that is the delusion that's going to end all life in the universe. That's going to destroy us. So we have to. The only hope to save us is the Socratic attitude that we have to recognize that we don't know a hell of a lot. We don't know the implications of what we're doing, and we're not thinking about it. And that's the biggest danger that confronts us for the survival.
Maybe it's because I've read too much Gadamer, but I guess I always thought Socratic questioning was kind of embedded within empirical methods of, right? Like when we think about the scientific method as a process of falsification, right? Like that science is never finished. It's always open to revision. So, right, like I hear what you're saying, that the kind of hubris of the empiricism that emerges in the 1700s and later, but I guess, even in Truth and Method, doesn't Gadamer say something like Socratic questioning just is the essence of the scientific method?
No, not the scientific method at all. But it is true that science does conceive itself, you're right, as being open, as being sort of open to, but it is still dominated by method. And Socratic thinking is totally outside of and beyond so-called method, as it were, which is very difficult for us to grasp what he means by method, because we think, oh, method is flexible, it can apply to anything. What's so dogmatic about method? But no, it's a good, excellent question. It's it's just to doubt. It's just to like Heidegger says in what is called thinking, we're not thinking. That's the real danger. And to think that we think we can solve everything through scientific method, through scientific knowledge. We think that we can act, we can save ourselves. We can't. We think that we assume that we know the end. All we have to do is figure out the means. Wrong. We're just so ignorant about our own ignorance. But I know I'm not putting my finger directly on a response to your question, but it's the Greek like with for the Greek science, there was something. It was noetic. It was like it wasn't something you could empirically sort of grasp. Neither is any sort of science based on empirical. Like modern science, modern mechanics isn't not empirically based. We delude ourselves into thinking it is. But Newton's first law of gravity, for example, says that like a body that is put in motion will continue continuously forever in a straight line. That's not empiricism at all. That's a totally new idea that was revolutionary at the time, that you can never observe a body. Like such a body does not exist. Like I've never seen a body do that. Like this, it's just empiricism is just not philosophy at all.
Well, all right, Saba. Thanks, John. Saba, you want to get in here?
Yeah, I think the question is interesting and important because there is, I think, some confusion in the way Gadamer begins this whole argumentation. Because natural science, the opposition between natural science and Socratic thinking seems to be the distinction between instrumental knowledge on the one hand and a kind of understanding of religious or aesthetic demands or the other kinds of knowledge, wisdom, or whatever. But the confusion is that both mathematics and this Socratic question is traced back to the Greek beginnings, and it's not really clear what the exact role of the concept would be in. I mean, the title of the essays is from word concept and back from concept to the word. So I think that the answer here to the question is that the distinction between empiricism and Socratic way of thinking is a kind of contrast between instrumental knowledge of natural science in the modern sense of the word, mastering processes in the world or environment, as contrasted with an attempt to understand or seeking to understand resources of meaning and so on. But I would be very interested in elaborating this contrast to some greater detail, because I think that Gadamer begins with the wish to clarify what philosophy is and what is the relationship between philosophy and hermeneutics. But after all, he did not really say a lot about this.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Saba. That's a second way to think about this, right? To think about it as an instrumental approach to knowledge versus the kind of understanding that we find in hermeneutics. Haley, you want to get in here?
Yeah, thanks. So I just wanted to maybe respond to the conversation happening between John and Nathan a bit and ask a question. I was curious about also the relation between empiricism and the Socratic method, and then in the paragraph below, the one that Nathan read from, Gadamer moves to talk about Hegel and the importance of the synthesis between these two ways of thinking. And I was wondering if anyone had any insight into what the synthesis between these two ways of thinking are. as we move from Socratic to empiricism to Hegel.
Okay, so we have a contrast, and then he suggests Hegel tries to overcome that contrast and synthesize them. Thoughts on what he means there when he talks about Hegel?
Well-
No, the question isn't what is
Sorry.
actually synthesized. I guess the question is, what is the significance of significance of the synthesis?
I see.
Say that 5 times fast. Because it doesn't seem like Gadamer wants us to return necessarily to the Socratic way of being and questioning. He wants to figure out, like Hegel, how we can fuse these things together. And maybe that's something that's helpful in this philosophy of the future that he's working out.
Ah, okay, I understand better. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, it was my fault. But thoughts on that?
Just real briefly, Gadamer doesn't think the synthesis works. It was a failure. Just so you're clear about that. And he doesn't think they can be, and I think he does see a certain return to the Socratic thing in a certain sense as crucial, as necessary to gain something we've lost. So that'd be my comment.
I mean, it strikes me in that quote that Gadamer says that they do not seem to go together, as if the sharp distinction is maybe an illusion, or we're not thinking about them clearly enough. And that if there's a return to Socratic thinking, it's not by rejecting a scientific way of encountering reality, but rethinking of a way that sees these as both ways of encountering reality without having to resort to an elaborate Hegelian metaphysics. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
So part of the question is going to be, what is Gadamer offering us for this picture that takes both these ways of encountering reality seriously, ways in which they might go together, even though it seems like they would not to go together because they're two different kinds of knowledge, or they're two different kinds of attitudes toward how we encounter things. One of humility, one of not knowing, versus one of confident assertion. That strikes me as like one of the core questions of the whole reading. Yes, Eric.
So it makes me think a lot about the kind of selling power that Bachelor of Sciences now have compared to Bachelor of Arts, and how this kind of right, like seeing business majors as graduating with Bachelor of Science, and that kind of credibility that is automatic, the symbolic capital of that. Anyway, that's in the background for me.
Right, with one of those as being significant, and more relevant, and more connected to encountering reality than the other. David Weberman.
Yeah,
Figure me-
one way to
Yeah,
think
there you go.
about it might be to go back to Heidegger, and maybe what Gadamer has in mind might be something like what Heidegger has in mind when Heidegger says that knowing the world is grounded in something else. That's not to say that knowing the world, or say the kind of knowledge we get from science and empiristically conceived, is illegitimate. It's just to say that it's grounded on something deeper, and we need to not forget that something deeper. And in Heidegger, it's the force structure of understanding, and Gadamer seems to buy into that in Truth and Method. So maybe the Socratic method is one which, isn't identical to the force structure of understanding, but it shares something, namely a recognition in the sort of circular nature of questioning. So Gadamer doesn't want to delegitimize science or what we get from the empirical sciences. But just to say that it can't be the whole story, it can't even be the deepest part of the story, something like that.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. I'm gonna have Cynthia come in next as a new voice, and then we're going to use Saba.
Yeah, I don't know. One of the things, this may be building a little bit off what David just said, but it seemed to me that one of the main sort of topics or themes throughout the essay was this term, das Gleichgewicht, balance or equilibrium. That occurred
Yes.
about, I don't know, 10 times, different variants of that. And then, what he seemed to be saying to me was that both of these have their own realms, right? That both of them are very important. It's not that we should just sort of emphasize one over the other, although, just as David said, we have this tendency maybe today to, try to, or science has a tendency to, colonize other realms and say this is the only way to do things. But I don't know what he said on page 116. This is the first full paragraph toward the very end, after he had just talked about those distinctions in Plato's Statesman, about the different ways of, the right measure versus the mathematicized or scientific way. He says, so it's like the last sentence, I think. He says, I think it is not permissible that one form should try to be the whole answer. One form of measuring is not more important than the other. Rather, both forms are important. And I don't know, it just struck me that this essay, because I think he wrote this when he was 94, it seemed to be one of the most balanced, and again, he's like performing this balance in this essay of, it doesn't seem as polemical as some of his other essays maybe, and maybe those even aren't as polemical, but it just seems that he's trying to strike that proper balance between the importance of these two realms and importance of different ways of knowing.
Yeah, right. Thanks, Cynthia. That's gonna be one of the main terms we're going to talk about over the next hour and a half, right? Is measure, and what he means by measure, because it's such a central concept here. Yeah, Saba.
I just wanted to express my agreement with John Beach. I don't think that there is any attempt to reach a synthesis of different sorts of human knowledge or different fields of human experience here, and the quotation Cynthia have just brought verifies this with the opposition of two kinds of measuring or two kinds of looking at things without any promise of a whole in which they could be put together. And a further suggestion to understand or to hear the formula of Socratic way of questioning, that is of course the considerations in Truth and Method about the question of logic and answer. So the Platonic, the dialectics of Plato is there in Truth and Method, closely connected to this idea that every kind of understanding and every statement, every use of language is embedded in a wider whole where there are previous questions, previous presuppositions, answers, and so on. So that could also be an aspect of the Socrates way of questioning and answering.
Oh, great, thanks. So I'm curious about what people think about what I took to be David Weberman's sort of Heideggerian suggestion of the way these might be connected, by suggesting that there is the pre-theoretical level of understanding. And I think, David, you even used the word grounding, right? And then the more scientific, propositional, instrumental conception ways of relating to the world are built upon, or they're grounded on, that more hermeneutic pre-theoretical understanding. Is the thought here that he's moved away from that possible that kind of Heideggerian solution, and say, no, there isn't a priority of the hermeneutic here, but rather what we have are two different ways of engaging the world, both with their own kind of measure, which can't be synthesized into a larger story? Did that question make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, John Beach. Oh, David, do you want to
Okay.
reply first, since it sort of took up what you were
No,
talking about?
no, I think it's, yeah, not, I think it is one grounded in the other rather than being simply next to each other, applied to different areas. So, but I'll let others speak.
All right, go ahead, John Beach.
Yeah, I'll be on the two different areas camp. That's and I think that and I think Sylvia brought out a great point about the concept of balance, which is the answer here. And he uses the organism and health and the statesman, a lot of things. And he says this begins in epic, in Homer. Well, how does that happen? How does this, what we need, how does it come from Homer? Well, see, this is the way Homer is mistaught and misunderstood in the universities today, because in Homer there are two instances. We think of the gods being capricious. That's what we say. Before is before reason. Well, that's nonsense. In Homer, there's two instances where Zeus wants to do something with the death of Sarpedon, his son, and also with the death of Hector, where he wants to prevent it. And in both cases, Hera says, no, you can't do that. And Zeus is the most powerful god there is. He's what guarantees the balance, the justice for everything. He's the reason why spring and winter and hot and wet and dry and hot. He's the reason why everything is sustained in this incredible order. But what he does, he takes out, in order to, Hera says, you can't do that because chaos would break out among the gods. So he takes out the scales of Moira, which is destiny. And that's even more powerful than any god could possibly be. And he sees where this is the balance. He sees that Hector's life goes down, and he's got to die. And so this is throughout all of pre-Socratic thought, even in Plato and Aristotle, you see this concept. Now, this thing of balance isn't something that man decides or judges what is to be balanced. It is there in being itself. And it is we are there to find out and listen and question and never know Socratically what the good is, but to sort of strive for it. And that is something about what we are and what really is. The fact that we can predict and control certain things of nature, yeah, that comes later. You get laws of nature and all that stuff brand new in the 17th century. Greeks didn't know anything about laws of nature. Again, this is a whole myth that's in the academic world, a misunderstanding. So basically you have a different, like science has its own, works well for science. Yeah, it works well for blowing things up, destroying the world. Sure, it's good. Technology, it's great. But it is not what we are, who we are, and what our destiny is, and how we can prevent ourselves from committing collective suicide. That's not going to come from science at all, or artificial intelligence.
Yeah, or AI. All right, thanks,
AI,
John.
yeah.
So, I mean, you want to say the kind of measure of science still needs the kind of measure you find in ethics, Socratic questioning, in this other sort of way in which we really ask, why are we doing this, and what's at stake, and what really matters, and what is the risk?
Science is going to tell us that we don't have long. The glaciers, the ice caps, the blah blah blah, the forests, blah blah blah. That none of this is going to come back. Science tells us that. Science tells us our days are numbered, but science doesn't tell us how we can overcome it, how we can deal with it, because all we know is how to act and control. This is throughout Gadamer, it's throughout Heidegger too. And so this is why we need philosophy. And for Gadamer, philosophy and hermeneutics, same thing. Realism is a Cartesian pseudo-philosophy stuff that people get, entangled in today. And he's saying that we got to communicate with the other cultures because they are not, even though now they're totally controlled by Western science, they're not going to. But the other cultures and our Greek heritage was outside of this sort of scientific thing that's got us in its control today.
Yeah. Yeah, I really want to get into that part of the reading too, where he talks about other cultures. I just want to clear, you think that both science needs philosophy and philosophy needs science?
Well,
not sure
we got
about the second
along
reference.
without modern science for a couple thousand years, but we sure don't know how to handle it.
Yeah.
So we sure as heck don't. And if we better learn pretty quick, or it's not. I say our days are numbered.
Okay.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah. Thanks, John. I appreciate it. Eric's been waiting very patiently. Eric, please get in.
Everything I'm about to add corroborates, John, what you were just saying. It's on page 111, basically. And so he even goes into destiny at the bottom of 111, right when he's talking about like our fate and a world that was philosophically expressed through concepts will be able to bring itself into harmony with the equally deep insights into the destiny of humanity, blah, 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 right? And so just that this sense of what part of our destiny will be shaped by what concepts emerge through this actual intercultural dialogue, and that this intercultural dialogue is supposed to like rekindle the wisdom that was dismissed through the Enlightenment's prejudice against prejudice, something like that.
Yeah, oh yeah, and there's very real knowledge that I mean, in all these other cultures too, like they've been like for years I've gone to this every winter, this yoga ashram in the Bahamas for like 25 years, and these guys come over from India to teach Hindu philosophy, but they're totally absorbed Western concepts in the way they present it. It's just become so objectivity and also it's just become so like it's spread the world over. So and we can't the West can't stop prevent environmental catastrophe, and every culture in the world has to be a part of it, has to understand it. But the stuff that the wisdom that was see in Greek philosophy, they hadn't cut off their connection to religion. In classical metaphysics, there were like theology still played a central role, and that's I think that's important to recognize too.
Before we move on to the cross-cultural stuff, which is really interesting, I know, Eric, you really want to take us there. I mean, Haley, can I call you back in here because you're the one who first put this question on the table? I'm not sure I got your question wrong the first time. I'm not sure I got it right the second time. It seems like there's some disagreement about whether Gadamer is aiming toward a synthesis and what that might look like, and what we'd have to look at to know which way he's going to go and clarify. But is this helping at all? The kind of question?
Yeah, for sure. I just thought it maybe would be beneficial to consider the move from Plato empiricism to Hegel, because it saves Gadamer from looking like just a romantic that wants to merely return to the Socratic mode of being. Gadamer is a historically effective consciousness. He's aware that we cannot return. We have to rehabilitate these concepts that are helpful for us in our contemporary time. And I thought the move to Hegel was maybe him indicating that that's what he was doing.
Okay, good, great.
I don't know, maybe you all disagree with me, I'm not sure.
No, I think it's good. Saba, go ahead.
Just wanted to come back to this intercultural issue, where I think that Gadamer is simply either naive or entirely optimistic about what was going to happen. I mean, just to put the picture very, very rudely, I mean, even according to his theory, mutual understanding or understanding presupposes openness, and it's quite clear that in intercultural dialogues or confrontations, sometimes at least, openness entirely lacks. I mean, 2 years after this talk, there was Samuel Huntington's book about the clash of civilizations. I mean, that's so even if we think that Huntington goes too far, that's a clear point of the possibility of confrontations which are not or cannot be grounded on mutual understanding. So I would heartily know how do you see it. I don't really think that politics or certain political constellations can fruitfully be described with Gadamer's hermeneutics.
Okay, thanks. Naive or optimistic? Those are our options. Maybe naively optimistic, maybe all of the above. Well, let's look right at these sections where he talks about understanding other cultures and how this is going to work. But John, you want to get in here?
Just quick, I want to sort of expand a bit on what Haley was saying, that, yeah, it's not a Gadamer, it's never been, sort of the Carol des Enchaînés des Modernes, or des Modernes des Enchaînés. But it was monumentally, Gadamer says, fought out within Hegel. So she's right to say, like, it's not a simplistic, should it be them or us? It's not that. I mean, that's too simplistic. Good point. But there are truths in Greek philosophy that Gadamer thinks are higher and more philosophically profound than our philosophy is today. But it's not a battle of the ancients and the modern. It started this way. We have to learn what it means for us today and recapture it and re-grasp it and bring it alive again and learn from it. So I would say,
of course, there's a reason we're all doing, Gadamer's a philosopher and we're doing philosophy. We're not in a lab somewhere.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree with you.
Let's take a look at page 117 and 118, because this seems to be important sections for the focus on understanding other cultures. It starts by talking about the politician. He's got the example of the handlebars. He's holding it very tightly and rigidly and not working. He loosens his grip, allows the play to occur. He can respond to the changes, and all of a sudden he's able to ride the bicycle. And the politicians make mistakes by being too rigid, right? Blindly and angrily applying rules. Then he turns to talk about, Wade says, environmental problems. And this is an interesting paragraph because I don't know where else he talks about animals in this way. It's essential we behave more appropriately because of environmental concerns. And of course, they're much more serious now than they were in 1994, or at least we're much more aware of how serious they are. We all feel this when we observe animals and their ways of life. We should hold them in respect in the same way one holds and respect other human beings with their varied beliefs and ways of life. That strikes me as a very controversial phrase, and not something he's ever suggested before, that animals deserve the same kind of respect we give to human beings, but okay. And then he says, these are relevant questions that we are all struggling with today. For now we see what depends on them: movements to settle inequities, to create balance, that's the balance word, and for exchange. I guess, Cynthia, it was balance that you stressed, not measure, wasn't it? Sorry about that, balance. It is essential, therefore, to recognize all the varied forms of human life and the expressions of their particular worldviews. In doing so, we find ourselves in the realm of hermeneutics. This I call the art of understanding. I mean, it keeps going. I don't know. I want to read 2 straight pages, but as you can see, this is where he really talks about understanding fully other cultures. And then on the next page, he talks about people from Japan, East Asians coming to German universities, learning German language, learning German culture. And he thinks that likewise, there has to be a return and an interest in Asian culture for the Europeans. So, for example, and he distinguishes at the bottom of 118, finding a guru from India fascinating, which he thinks is sort of a trivial kind of understanding versus understanding other ways of life as wholes. Understand all that comprises the basis of these cultures, view of family, of ancestors, of death, the living on of ancestors within us. And these cultures, also in these cultures, such a decisive concept as their evaluation of human life. Only when we do this, he says, perhaps, only perhaps this might suffice as a European standard for arriving at an agreement on what understanding is. Only the Christian view is a European understanding. So he thinks that we need to do this sort of cross-cultural outreach in order to really develop, I guess I would say, develop our moral understanding enough that we can create solidarity. He will talk about solidarity and community as tools for limiting the kind of impulses that you find from the sciences. Is that do you think it's a fair characterization of what's going on in these pages? I want to make sure I didn't misrepresent the views here. I sort of skimmed over as I went along. Was there something I missed that you think, oh, this is really important? John Garner.
I think what you were saying there was, I basically agree with everything you were saying there in terms of summarizing it. And also when you highlighted this line at the bottom of 118, when he says, understanding other ways of life as a whole. And it struck me that was in contrast to the passage we had been reading earlier, where it's actually the line before. If you go back to, it's a bit of a transition from the previous discussion to this one, kind of moving back and forth here, but it's 112, the sentence before the paragraph we started with on the empirical sciences versus the Platonist position. He says, we have good reason to recall that it was Hegel who saw himself faced with the philosophical task of gathering together the sciences and everything else that did not merge with science, such as metaphysics and religion, and to raise these up into the uniting whole of an encompassing concept. So it seems like whatever he means by whole at the bottom of 118 is probably not what he's describing by the Hegelian move of absorbing art and religion into the uniting whole of an encompassing concept. The whole isn't the problem, but the encompassing concept seems to be the problem, at least the way I was reading it. And it relates to this question of synthesis, because it seems like there could be some kind of synthesis that sort of respectfully brings the concept back to the word, which is a different language and a different culture with its different words and all this other stuff. But that would be very different from absorbing the word into the concept in the Hegelian mode or something like that. I'm done.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. That would be the difference, and that's where the issue rises. I mean, Healy brought up romanticism, and it does seem to have a romantic idea that each culture is like kind of an individual, a self-contained individual. And just as every individual is unique and needed to understand in their own terms, so to a culture must be understood in its own terms, in its uniqueness and in its completeness. And then maybe there's some historicism here too, the idea that you cannot find a sort of a higher standpoint in which everything becomes subsumed and put into place and organized in that way. All you can do is just try to understand better and learn better. Yeah, Cynthia.
Yeah, no, I very much agree with everything that John just said. I think that's a really good way to put things. I want to go back to what you were saying about the politics part or the political aspects. So back to that passage on 117, where he does, specifically turn to politicians and politics. Right before you started reading, he says, this is toward the end of the first full paragraph. He says, we must make justice our starting point, which I thought was, I can only think of a handful of places where he says something that explicit. Uses the term justice in that way. So I thought that was very interesting. We must make justice our starting point and central concern. And in particular, we must make right use of our knowledge and ability to do things. And so then he goes into his discussion about environmental problems. And so, I don't know, going back to what we were saying about sort of destiny and all that, I'm honestly very bothered by all this destinal talk. I think that I don't know what it does to like our own agency and ability to act to solve these problems. And it seems to me that, we're going to need both. We're going to need knowledge from both of these realms, certainly from, the hard sciences, but also from, the other things that he's talking about with respect to the human sciences, because this environmental problem is so great. And so I don't know. I thought it was really very interesting that all this, when he turns to the political, then he's using these terms. Of course, justice can be an ethical concept, is an ethical concept, but also very much a political. And then you mentioned David solidarity, and his emphasis, it seems like in his later works on solidarity. My understanding is that he's drawing from the Polish solidarity movement there, from Josef Tischner and this movement of solidarity. So it does seem to me that he's kind of making these at least political, moves slightly. I'm not trying to put him out as a political philosopher or anything, but I think that could be a development in Gadamerian scholarship that would be very helpful.
All right, there's a research project for somebody. John Veach.
Yeah, I would just, I was going to comment, I'll just briefly comment about something else, but just on following up on what Cynthia said, is that I see Gadamer's telling us that justice is an ontological concept. I think that's what his point is. And it's not, see, the ethical means it requires the agency of man to sort of figure it out, and self-consciousness. But I think it's deeper than that. It goes to what really is and what we really are. That's why the concept of balance, which is inherent in Homer and philosophy throughout. But I also say, to get the Hegel point, I think it's really crucial to read, it's the dialectic of the ancient philosophers in Hegel's dialectic. And in the third page there, he quotes a whole section from the preface to Hegel's Phenomenology, where he talks about the whole idea of getting back from concept to word. Like, this is what Hegel was trying to do, to break down, to get free, and the fixed determinations of thought, which have cut us off from the manifold existence. And the Greeks, the natural consciousness of the Greeks, because the Greeks were the first to form consciousness out of or concepts out of spoken language. And of course, this was Heidegger's thing too. And this was like the destruction of metaphysics. Gadamer says basically in Heidegger means it's the destruction of the rigidity of these concepts that it all goes back to language in Gadamer and the way we use language. Everything's grounded in that. And so I would say it's really helpful to see that article, some of his written stuff on Hegel, to see because it's going from concept back to word too. Hegel attempted to do that.
Yeah, thanks, John. I have that also on the list of one of the big things we need to get into. I mean, we need to measure, balance, and the title from word to concept and concept and word, and how that plays out right across the thing. Haley, you're up.
Thanks. Cynthia, your comment made me think of a million different things. I've been looking at some of the solidarity stuff and the Polish solidarity movement in Gadamer's thinking. Oops, I have to lower my hand. So I just wanted to say a couple of, or something really quickly about this, I guess. My understanding of Gadamer's inspiration with Polish solidarity is that it has a lot to do with like upbringing and people coming to consciousness about their own freedom. So in some sense, it's not hyper political, but it's an ethico-political transformation, which is how I was reading the justice here, that it's justice in particular situations that is at once ethical and at once political. But beyond that, I wanted to turn actually to the last page, if that's okay, on 120, and just read this line that made me think that this is what Gadamer means by solidarity, maybe. Only if we accomplish both will we gain, and the both is from word to concept and from concept to word, will we gain a rational understanding of each other. Only in this way, too, will we be able to hold ourselves back so that we can allow the other person's views to be recognized. We have the ability to become so absorbed in something that we totally forget ourselves in it. This is one of the great blessings of the experience of art, as well as one of the great promises of religion. And I was so fascinated by his turn to he's talking about how we need reason, but that he turns to this irrational, mystical kind of like dissolution of the self in order to talk about what we need for the future. And I don't know. I feel like I just said a bunch of different things that didn't make a lot of sense, but I would be interested to know what you all think about this in relation to solidarity.
Okay, thanks, Haley. I've got those marked down. David, go ahead. You might be muted, David.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I don't really understand the opposition between concept and word here. I don't think I have a clue actually. So I just read it once. Maybe it was maybe it was there, but I wonder if we could talk about that distinction and what that means.
How about I promise you we'll get to it. I just want to make sure that we've managed to sort of close off one of the topics before, because we've got
but I
a couple things still on the table.
I think the solidarity question is really interesting, so I didn't need to shut that down. But
no, you haven't shut it down. I'm keeping it open. So, but you brought us back to one of the core questions, right, about concept and word, and that's true. We're gonna have to get straight on what exactly he means there, other than just something cool sign. Saba, did you want to get back in here, because you started this by saying it's naive and either naive or optimistic?
Yeah, I mean, there are two aspects to distinguish here. First is intercultural dialogue on an everyday level. Where when I go to East Asia or East Asians come to Europe, and we have a sort of cultural interchange, learning each other languages and so on. And there is a further level of conflicts of different cultures and religions and cultural backgrounds, and that happens on the level of international affairs or great politics. And I mean, what I was saying that was related, of course, to this higher level.
Yeah.
And accordingly, I also think that the hope that there will emerge or rise a sort of solidarity encompassing the whole mankind. So I'm a bit skeptic about this again on this high level. So that's what I would add to this.
Yeah, thanks. That makes sense. Just a second, Eric, I'm going to say something because Haley touched on something that one of the ways that it struck me as potentially naive is the way that he doesn't just simply contrast the West and the East. The East is always referred to in terms of like Indian religions or Chinese religions. It's really strikes me like the West has got science, the East has got religion, and we haven't been thinking enough about our science, and we're taking over the world and potentially destroying it. And that seems to be a very old and naive sort of Orientalism, the idea that they have a kind of non-scientific wisdom that we can learn from. Well, we have all our scientific understanding. I don't know if that's exactly the picture, but at times it feels like that is the picture he's got in his mind, that I find sort of a simplistic division between the West with its science and the East with its spiritualism. Eric.
Yeah, I wanted to build off what you were saying too, Haley, that you were quoting at the end on page 120, where you brought up this forgetting of ourselves. But I think if I'm not quite sure, I think you were saying something like there's this kind of mysticism to it, if I remember what you were saying. And I just wanted to reiterate his comment about on 112, where there's forms of questioning that do not let go of us, as if it's not really in our control. And I wonder if it's a more moderate form of forgetting of ourselves than this kind of mystical disillusion of the self.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. That's a good maybe correction of my use of mystical there.
But even on that page, he does start getting into like that invites theological reflection. So it's not that they're not connected, right? Just that I guess I would want to soften the mystical disillusion and make it more of a like the passivity of questioning, something like that.
Okay. Haley, you want to reply to that, or should I go on to John Beach?
Oh, I'll just say, I guess one thing. Yeah, I'm thinking about that in relation to the first part of Truth and Method on the work of art, and how there's kind of the self-forgetting as we're always engaging with something that exceeds our capacity to understand it, and we have the back and forth. So maybe it's just a reformulation of that process here.
Yeah, thanks. John Beach?
Yeah, just David, in response to your sort of comment there, I don't think that Gadamer does have that naive
Okay.
view. I think he goes out of his way to point that out here, because he says, like on 111, he talks about the transformation that's happened worldwide, that in all these cultures, the same mathematized and formalized thinking is gaining the upper hand. And he also talks about down below. He talks about that too. How it's the whole world uses technology and science and thinks in those terms, and yet, like, see, we can't deal with the ecological problem with, I mean, if China is thinking in totally Western technological and scientific terms, and we can't do it without China. We have to. It's a problem for everybody on the planet, and so, but nevertheless, just as they have their religious sort of background, we have ours too. We have the Greeks that we've totally misunderstand, totally, and we can learn from them. And I think that's where I think balance is the true, which is the Greek, which is the central concept of all Greek thought, that and the basis of Western science. I think that's the answer for all cultures. But I mean, I think it's reified in these other cultures too. It's complex. I mean, it's not. I don't know if I'm making any sense to what I'm saying here, but it's not a. I know that's a simplistic thing. Well, I mean, that's what they say at the ashram I go to. Yeah, we'll learn from the East and we'll solve all our problems. And that's BS. Gadamer never bought into that. As a matter of fact, 50 years ago, he and I spent hours and hours and hours, better part, like dozens and dozens of hours together discussing the end of the world, the ecological end of the world. I can remember, and some of our road car trips, we were talking about it in the mid-70s, and he didn't, like, he was more responding to my concerns about it, but he didn't object, or he sort of even saw it back then, although it's not as sort of in our face like it is today. But so, I mean, this goes way back, and you can see this throughout Gadamer. It's sprinkled in a lot of his work. And I think his comment in the second edition, or in Truth and Method, about Heidegger being sort of like a Cassandra, I don't think it was directed against this at all. Like, I interpret it quite differently.
Okay.
But anyway,
fair enough. I hope you're right. How's that for an answer? What is there? Do you want to do a final word on this focus of understanding other cultures for the hope of a kind of political progress to solve the world's ethical problems? Yes, Eric?
Well, it's referencing back to Cynthia, what you were saying earlier, like the raising concerns about the questions about destiny and fate on page 111 toward the bottom there. The way that he puts this one line, or better, like he's correcting himself with regard to how much he's emphasizing destiny and fate, And he says, or better, our fate will be measured by how that future is going to be determined by us. So there is this kind of like catching himself getting too fatalistic about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Okay, well, let's look at the title, Word to Concept and Concept to Word. It did come up in the quote that Haley read, which was right after, it's the closing paragraph. From concept to word, if we wish to reach the other person. So this is clearly a reference of dialogue, engaging in dialogue with somebody else and finding a way to put our thoughts into words and to put their thoughts into words in ways that we can understand what they're saying. But there's the other side of it too, from word to concept. David, do you want to tell us where you feel like, what is he even talking about here, right?
Yeah, I sense that language is on the side of dialogue, and concept is on the side of, I don't know, sort of domineering, bad mastery over the world that science engages in. So if that's the alignment, then I understand, what the opposition is. I'm not sure that concepts are wholly on the side of this bad kind of totalizing way of dealing with the world, and not part of what it is to communicate with one another. And then word is supposed to be on the side of friendly, open dialogue, but not on the side of this totalizing way of thinking. So I don't know. I'm just surprised to find these words used in this way, but maybe that's the alignment that he's got in mind. I'm not sure.
Yeah, thanks. That makes sense. John Arthos.
Yeah,
You might be muted. There you go.
yeah. So how do I
I'll lower your hand.
lower hand? Okay. Yeah, so well, I mean, I think it's a fair concern, but what's interesting is he's very clear that, so at the end in the last paragraph, as everyone has pointed out, he says, we need both. And we have to move from word to concept, but he's not saying that we can't also move towards concepts. And clearly he's very much on the side, he's very much against this sort of reductive use of concepts as mathematical reasoning, right? That's one of his great themes. But he's more appreciative of Hegel than, and he wouldn't put Hegel in that category, although he's critical of Hegel's move towards absolute concepts, the Begriff, right? So it's almost as though, so we have this richer sense of moving from concepts to language that's sort of moving towards the rough ground of phronesis and all that. But then he doesn't really thematize, especially in this essay, he doesn't really thematize what would be a healthier move towards concepts. So, and the thing is, English doesn't have a very good word for, we talk about polarity, and polarity suggests, opposite extremes, and the tension between the two. But what he's trying to do here is to sort of create more of a dialogue between the two. But he doesn't really give us a whole lot. Now he does have in the anthology, in Palmer's anthology, there are a couple of essays where he's much more specific about this, from where he talks about the truth of the word and then language and understanding. He goes into more depth, but he still doesn't really, he isn't as clear about what a healthier relationship to the concept would look like, except insofar as he takes us back to, to the Socratic dialogue and all of that. So I mean, I think the confusion or the ambiguity is warranted because he doesn't really fill that out for us.
Yeah, thanks, John. And I mean, the context for this is Hegel week. So maybe part of it is he's taking a Hegel account of a concept and starting from there. Karen, did you want to get in here? I saw you posted something in the chat.
Well, so Eric and I were having a little side conversation just about what word and concept actually meant. So Eric proposed that words are culturally specific, but concepts reach for more universality, which I think is also how I took that. But then the question was which allowed for greater solidarity. And it seemed to me like he, in that final paragraph where Haley directed our attention, it seemed like he was saying that word afforded greater solidarity because that's where we might forget ourselves in our experience of an other or a particular. But I'm not, that's as far as that conversation went. I'm not sure maybe this is backing up the conversation to where Haley was directing our attention, but I'm not sure that part actually makes sense to me, because he seems to be indicating that any kind of solidarity or even understanding that we might have between two human beings is necessarily conceptual. And that seemed opposed to the two examples he gives here of art and religion, which are not necessarily so. So maybe I'm just taking issue with the movement from concept to word. Like, do concepts always have to be involved?
Okay, yeah. John Beach, did you want to reply to that? No, that's
yep.
That's
all of this
on the table. Yeah,
yes,
good.
yes, and I think that there's not. I mean, this is why you can't understand Gadamer if you don't understand his writings on the Greeks. Just forget it. Sorry, be so absolute about it. It's not possible, because there you would learn that all concepts grow out of the language, and Plato and Aristotle were very aware of that, and they grow out of speech, out of concepts. But concepts and words, like if we look at language as from an instrumental perspective, yes, I mean, all philosophy grows out of speech, it grows out of language. And I mean, look at Aristotle, book Delta, book 5 in the Metaphysics, and which is it just lists all these philosophical terms and all the different meanings. Well, in our modern instrumental view of language, yeah, we think that we don't understand that we think, oh, this is ambivalence. Heidegger or Gadamer is ambivalent. This is docile. Whatever. But not at all. And I mean, Gadamer, when he looks at a word to use philosophically, he'll sort of analyze the major meanings, and we have to be clear about all meanings. Like in the beginning of philosophy, the meaning of beginning, he says there's 3 key meanings in this concept, and there's 3 sides of the same coin. Try to figure that one out. But I mean, they all come. They are distinct, but you can never use one without the other. And this is just the way language is. And Gadamer's entire writing and philosophy is based on this and thinking, and it's interwoven. So I don't think there's a mystery here between like concept and word aren't opposed to each other. Like, what is bad is when metaphysical concepts, mean scholasticism, and then when mixed in with Christianity becomes, they become fixed sort of things that that they dominate our thinking unconsciously and so on, and we're channeled into this sort of thing. That's a problem, and that's why they want to get back to words. But there's a fluidity here that you always have to go back to, and sure, the Greek philosophy was built on forming these concepts that came out of the language that these meanings were there. We didn't invent them or create them. And then, but we have to remember that this is language that we speak, and these are just words, you know. Does that make any sense? No.
Yeah, no, I think it
I was
helps.
working till the last line.
Okay, Karen, go ahead.
Sorry, Eric, to talk over you. I hear what you're saying. It makes sense about why Gadamer is interested in returning to word from concepts which might have sort of grown all of this baggage. And I understand that for Gadamer, all understanding is certainly linguistic. My question is all understanding conceptual, right? If we have this sort of fluidity between word and concept, and understanding must be linguistic, does he also think that all understanding must be conceptual? Or is it possible to, in this sort of return, to get away from the conceptual, sort of our commitment to the conceptual altogether, which seems to be part of what he's counting on when he references in that last sentence the experience of art and the promise of religion. But I'm not sure. Maybe I'm misreading that.
The first sentence of that last paragraph.
John, your mic's off. Sorry, David. John, I think John was speaking.
Okay, hang on.
Just one quick comment. All concepts are words. So to get away from words or concepts is ridiculous. Like it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I don't think Gadamer is anomalous on that. Well, we John and I think disagree about that. But Shaba, you're waiting to get in here. Go ahead.
I would like also to disagree with John Beach on this point. I mean, I think that in this essay, the term begriff or concept refers much less to philosophical language, and as you emphasized a couple of minutes ago, Gadamer thinks that all philosophical language is rooted in ordinary spoken language. That's true on the one hand, but on the other hand, if we
I lost him. Did you guys lose him?
I'm sorry?
Back now.
So if we consider, for example, the way Aristotle or Plato raised or picked out a certain formula from ordinary ancient Greek use, and Plato wrote in his dialogues to agaton auto or something like that, or even some Aristotelian formulas. By doing so, by putting these terms into these ordinary words into a philosophical language, they gained a new meaning. And I think that Gadamer is well aware of this bipolarity of language, philosophical concepts on the one hand and ordinary language on the other.
Well, Gadamer says there is no such thing as metaphysical. The language of metaphysics doesn't exist. There is language, and that's it. and so us like trying to contrast them and objectify them and sort of distinguish them, there's a fluidity there that is ineradicable. That is just the way they're used. It's just in their way with the rigidity. Like he says, Gadamer overcoming metaphysics. You can't. I mean, it just means overcoming the rigidity of philosophical concepts and not, moving back to words constantly, not looking at their meaning, what they mean for us.
Okay. David Weberman.
Yeah, one way to understand what Gadamer has in mind here is to think that he thinks of concepts as something like words that have become frozen and stale, and we we lose sensitivity to our experience and to the world and to each other insofar as we adopt these frozen, stale words, which he calls concepts. And we need to go back to language which is sort of more defined by the particular context and the particular dialogue and the particular situation. This reminds me a little bit of Nietzsche in Truth and Lie and Extramoral Sense, where Nietzsche views truths as sort of rigidified metaphors, and then in the latter part of the essay argues that we need to get back to a kind of more creative relationship to our own experience and to our own articulation of our experience. So this reminds me a bit of Nietzsche, Truth and Lie. I don't know whether anyone else might see that, but that's what struck me.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm really interested in this first sentence in the last paragraph where he says, without bringing concepts to speak and without a common language, I believe we will not be able to find the words that can reach other persons. And I was thinking about, especially if you're talking, cross languages. I mean, Cynthia brought up the German word earlier for balance, and we're trying to figure out what he means by that. And it seems to me that when we're doing that, we're trying to aim at some sort of general concept. We're trying to get at the meaning, which might say is the concept in the word, so that we can understand what he's saying, so that we can hear what he has to tell us, and we can communicate with him then, because we've moved from, in some sense, word to we've translated, and that translation is always through a concept. Maybe it's not a rich concept in metaphysical sense that Hegel or Plato would have talked about, but it seems like we have to move beyond the specificities of the way it's instantiated in a particular language in order to understand it, translate it, and then be able to communicate, to reach the other person. Maybe we don't have to do that when we share a language already. Maybe the words are enough and we can feel the words and feel the power of the words. And at no point are we just grasping the meaning of words. The word is present to us. But when we're trying to do the intercultural understanding, maybe concepts are the only way to do it.
Or that concepts need to be put into words that others can understand, or they need to put their concepts into words that I can understand.
Yeah, sure. Right.
So I wanted to go back to David Weberman, what you were saying about like concepts. Is it that concepts in general are stagnant? Or is it for Gadamer, like I'm thinking of this passage in Truth and Method where he's talking about Hegel's theory of the predicate as subsuming subjects and maintaining like a dynamism of thinking, whereas like the analytic linguistics or analytic philosophy of language, like the propositionalist ideology, that's concepts in their stagnation, but concepts as such do not have to be stagnant words. I'm just wondering because I'm still not clear what a concept even is. So I might not even be the right person to be asking questions about this.
Yeah, I'm also confused about equating the conceptual for Gadamer with the like metaphysics and stagnation. My Gadamer knowledge is definitely not as good as any of yours, but I would love a reference.
Yeah, I was thinking that that's not what concepts are, but that's the use to which he's putting concept in this essay, at least. And when he opposes it to word, that concept is the sort of loss of the particular, in a sense, the loss of the of newness, whereas word holds on to that. I mean, that's not my theory of what a concept and what a word is, but just my theory of what the opposition is supposed to be capturing here. Because I wasn't sure at first, but thanks to the discussion is becoming clearer.
It's worth keeping clear, talking about the ways he's employing the terms in the context of this talk during Hegel Week, in order to make the points he's making, and then in general his theory of concepts that may show up across 50 years of writings, right? Can I get John Arthos? Ask John to jump in here.
Yeah. So it's important to keep distinct the two kinds of reference to conceptuality that he's making. So on the one hand, he doesn't like pure concepts. He doesn't like the way in which modernity and the Enlightenment has tried to turn concepts into abstractions, pure abstractions, mathematical formulae, and so forth. So that's the bad way of talking about concepts that he doesn't like. But he doesn't dismiss concepts. I mean, he's a philosopher. He's not a poet. He's not a religious leader. He's a philosopher. So he does believe in concepts. And he says so right there in this essay. He says we need both. So then the question is, what does he mean? What is the good use of concepts? Some other essay, he talks about it in relationship to the Sache selbst. He's that whole, that we can't ever really reach the thing in itself. And he would probably also say we also can't reach the pure concept. There is no way to reach that because we're creatures of language. So in a way, it has to be a kind of maybe a regulative ideal towards which we try to achieve about which we have a sense of direction, but we are never able to reach anything as idealistic as a pure concept. But there's a kind of as one of you said earlier, there's a kind of sense that we need to clarify, we need to distinguish, we need to move, we move, in some cases, we need to move towards univocal meanings more so than in other cases. So it's so if you think about it as the thing in itself, it's something that we're never going to reach, and in some cases wouldn't want to reach.
Thanks, John. I want to get Eddie in here. We have a new voice. Eddie.
Hello, I can't start my video because it's a bit messy here. Sorry. I have a quick word on the concept of concepts. So in general, we can treat I'm buying a bit of Bertrand Russell here. So what he said, I think would be helpful would be, well, concepts are what we aware as universals, whereas just a mere awareness would be an aware of the particulars. So if our empirical gatherings, our empirical senses are our awareness in the particulars, but that doesn't make out any concept, nor does it mean anything, because that's just something very primary, unprocessed. So if that concept, if that thing has to come into a universal, which means now makes sense, now it can be transmitted, can be taught, can be shared into dialogues to other people, then it has to go into concepts. Our awareness of the universals, of patterns, of sequences, of the sciences, the Euclidean geometry and the provings he talked about in the passage, is I think what makes concepts is how we grasp out the universals such that other people can grasp the same universals such that we can talk. And if that's the sense of how concepts are coined in words, because you can only use words to deliver what is universal about the whole thing, then yeah, I guess that's the picture we can look at.
Okay, thanks, Eddie. It's a very plausible picture. I just want to say, I think one thing that phenomenology gives us that Russell doesn't is the idea that we're actually perceptually aware of universals rather than just perceptually aware of particulars and abstracting universals. But I think that is something that Gadamer accepts as part of the phenomenological tradition, which keeps everything else he said in place. It just I think makes it perceptually richer. But John Beach, you've been very patient, been waiting for a while for you to get in here.
No, this is great. I think we're really heading in a good direction here. And I remember a statement that John Arthos made in the last session. He talked about the multivocity, or the multivocity of meanings or something, whatever, however you say it. But I mean, what we do with a word is when we look into ourselves, into our presuppositions, into our unconscious associations with this word, what we bring along with it, and we analyze the differences and sort of separate them and distinguish them, even though we can never be dissociated, then we're treating a word that we use as a concept. And you can't separate concepts and words. There's not concepts here and words here. There's no such thing. I mean, the eidos for Plato, is that a concept or is that a word? Or is it, what is it? A horse is a horse. Well, is a horse a concept? Is a horse a word? So the thing is that you don't use language. We don't use it. It uses us. Language is a medium, and language is a way to discover our presuppositions and when we analyze what these meanings have for us, we bring them together and we think which is the most important meaning. And a beautiful example of this, I mean, Gadamer does this in all of his writings, but is the beginning of philosophy. The first full chapter is called The Meaning of Beginning. There's like a whole chapter on that, and he breaks it down. And he says, and of course, what's her name? Some of these people, Dostal and starts with a Z, these people that analyze it get it totally wrong, incorrect. They say, well, which is the real meaning, the main meaning? No, Gadamer says you can't separate them. If you go to the next chapter, it says, no, they're inseparable. And this is just the way language is. We don't have any choice over this. As far as univocity of terms goes, that's something that Gadamer has no interest in whatsoever. Terms that are not, there is no such thing as that's scientific, that's technical language, using language in that technical way. So but I think we're getting closer to that. And I mean, this is the ground of Gadamer's philosophical thought. This is of hermeneutics, which is philosophy. Same thing for Gadamer.
Okay, thanks, John. Cynthia.
If Nathan is wanting to follow up on John, I can wait for a second. Okay. This kind of relates to what we're talking about. I don't want to take us too astray, but just in that final paragraph, it's interesting to me, again, thinking about the context, that the context is this Hegel talk, right? And that the subtitle of the essay is the task of hermeneutics as philosophy. And he mentions really only at the end there, as I read it, religion and art. Whereas if you're thinking of Hegel, everything culminates in philosophy, but he doesn't mention philosophy. And then he's just made that move back from concept to word. If there's any significance to all that, if he's kind of making his final somewhat anti-Hegel statement there, or if I'm reading too much into that. Because he says, I thought it was really interesting how he says, this is ultimately one of the basic conditions that will allow us human beings to live together in a human way. Art and religion, it seems to me he's saying, being those things. So.
Yeah, nice catch, Cynthia. I think it makes perfect sense. Eric?
So I'm trying to think of a case study that crosses my mind often. So if I were to ask what year is it, and somebody says 2023, I know that they're not Muslim, I know that they're not Jewish, I know that they're not Hindu, I know that they're not Buddhist, because all of these other traditions have different era dating systems. So then now in an intercultural conversation where I go, well, for me, it's 2023, but for you, it's right. I'm imagining speaking with one of my Muslim friends, and they're saying, no, it's 1443 AH, right? And I'm going, okay, so you mark time relative to what event? Like it's 1400 years since when? And so going back to Gadamer saying, we're going to need to know everything to be able to have a conversation about like, what time is it? And so we start to then understand that we don't even think about time the same way, because the year zero for me is one, and year zero for you is a different like cultural phenomena. And so then, maybe what we'll do is we'll turn to physics. Well, physics is going to have the most accurate era dating system. And then again, it's just like, well, but why is that more accurate than the Muslim calendar or something like that? So now we're in this conversation where it's kind of confusing. And so now how do we formulate a concept out of that kind of breach in my own social norms, right? My own social norm is just to naively walk around going, it's 2023. And now all of a sudden confronted with a cultural other, I'm going, oh, time, how we even mark time is not universal. So now how do I come up with a concept through our interchange there? I don't know if that's I think about that with direction too. Like, is it cardinal coordinates, egocentric coordinates, Qibla compass, right? And then how do we come up with a concept that then can include the diversity of ways that we mark space, or diversity of ways that we mark time, but nevertheless, we realize that we're still talking about the same thing? That's just an example I'm trying to think of.
That's a great example.
Like, where might a concept emerge through this recognition of difference?
I got an email about the reading from somebody here, and we'll brought up the question of whether the idea of measure, as Gadamer uses it, whether it could be useful in these sorts of situations for enabling cross-cultural understanding, whether that concept of measure could fit this example. I don't know if that person wants to ask it themselves, or if it's just simply enough that I brought it up. But that is one of the things we haven't talked about yet, is measure.
Right, the relativity
measure might
of
function
measure. Yeah.
with respect to these other questions we've brought up. What, Eric, do you think measure will help there? Measure,
Well, I think
sense
that
of appropriateness.
I guess the reason why those specific examples come to mind for me is because each of them have precision within their framework, but none of them can be precise with regard to the other one. So it's like a contestation of measuring systems. And if physics doesn't answer the problem, which is the diversity of measurings, then we need to appeal to something else to reach balance with one another. Or, right, going back to Cynthia, or it's just political hegemony, where now globally it is 2023 because Christian Europe has kind of colonized the planet.
Yeah, good. Other thoughts about this and this line? I do want to have a chance to talk about both balance and measure as key concepts in the reading.
That's a major point in Plato, where he and Gadamer mentions it's Plato here. He says there's two, there's the mathematical measure, and then there's the appropriate, what is which can never be calculated mathematically. And Gadamer says the same thing, like with a musician concerning pitch and tonality. There's a perfection there. There's a complete sort of sense of what is perfect, and the same thing with time. As I was saying at the beginning, there's a sense that in what is perfect with the sense of time. But these are measures for and then so these are beyond scientific measurement, and they would have more to do with like what is practical, like how should we act and how should we think about things. So I don't know, that's how I see measure. It's not too complicated. It's the same as balance. Like, what is the perfect balance? or how do you strive for balance? How do you strive? Because that's the only way to sustain any kind of order in a society. Is through justice is balance. Those balance scales, right? So it's all has to, and that involves judgment, and that involves there's no way to scientifically do any of this, as it were, or mathematically. It's not too complicated, I don't think.
Okay. Yeah, Cynthia, you brought up, what is it, Gleichgewicht? Is that what the word is? For balance? Do you see as connected to, pretty straightforwardly connected to measure?
Yeah, I mean, I brought up the question. I'm not sure that I'm going to have anything too illuminating to say right now. It just struck me how prevalent that term was. I mean, he brings it up in the context also of the enigma of health. And yeah, I don't know, maybe it would be helpful to read that passage. I think it's on 114. It's the first full paragraph. I could read it for a couple of sentences and just see if maybe that helps in terms of the conversation, because I don't know that I have anything super insightful to say. I was able to elucidate this distinction not long ago in my book, The Enigma of Health, dealing specifically with illness as the object of medical science. Illness in itself is certainly a threat that one has to be on guard against. When one becomes ill, a doctor with knowledge and skill is needed, and one hopes that the doctor can bring the illness under control. Beherrschen. Health, on the other hand, is clearly something quite different, something we do not observe or control in the same way. Rather, it is something we follow, like a path, for example. When we are on the right path, we have the feeling that now we are headed in the right direction. The path under our feet becomes a way. There are, of course, many other instances, in addition to becoming physically healthy, that provide a clear contrast to the ideal of scientific governance and control. Yeah, it really struck me that I would love to hear what other people have to say, just this idea of feeling like we're on a path, and that we're headed in the right direction. I mean, that would seem to me to be something very similar to finding what is fitting, similar to what John was saying about, like in music, trying to find that right either rhythm or the right tonality, things like that aren't, mathematically arrived at. But nonetheless, he does say in this passage, right, that we do have to have the doctor who's of course trained, in medical science. And I don't really want somebody that hasn't gone through medical school to come and operate on me. So it seems like, again, he's in that very example, he's showing how you can have that balance between one kind of knowing and this fittingness, and that you just really have to have them both in conversation. The doctor has to have also that fittingness in dealing with the patient in a human way, and so forth. So that's it.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Thoughts on that?
In terms of feeling like being on the right path, it's making me think of some conversations that I've had with therapists about like whatever's working for you, right? That it might not be a good pattern of behavior for somebody else, but if it's working for you, then it's acceptable somehow, like, because they're not saying what is healthy for me, they're trying to figure out what's not healthy, right? So like just saying how they could work together, Cynthia, in that paragraph, where it's like the doctor can intervene with regard to illness and then can use like exactitude to bring the illness under control, but there's no like way to control for health, right? So health is the side that has the like, is it appropriate, or is it fitting, or is it working for you, right? Like that's what I start thinking of in relationship to that.
And okay.
Yeah, Karina, welcome to the conversation.
I'll weigh in from a health perspective in a room full of philosophers. When I was reading that particular passage in terms of the science of what can heal someone who has been living with illness, I think about this phenomenon in Canada anyway of precision medicine. I don't know if that's something that's happening in the US, but a few years ago, our nursing and medical programs were really being pushed to achieve what they called precision medicine, which is essentially, instead of saying a range of medication from this milligrams to this milligram for you would be appropriate, it's looking at your genomics and coming precisely within the dose that's appropriate for you, Karen, because of your genetics, et cetera. And I think at that time, we really pushed back against that as nurses, not so much because we didn't believe in the science and the empirics behind such research, but also knowing what makes somebody healthy or can help them recover from illnesses beyond sort of that precision of medicine. And I think back to my clinical work, like, so I work in a supervised consumption site here in Canada, in Lethbridge, Alberta. And for people who are overdosing on opioids, we give a very routine drug called Narcan, and there's a standard dose that we give, but I haven't been doing that when I see my patients overdose for a number of reasons, right? I see them go down. I know how long they've been without oxygen. I go slow and steady versus a photos. Maybe I do a half, knowing sometimes they wake up and they're in active withdrawal and they're very angry at me. And like, why did you Narcan me? Because now I have to hustle for more. When I get out of here. So I think that passage of the two ways of knowing, I think about it more from a practical level, and it makes sense to me. Like, you know, medicine gives us one form of tools. I wouldn't want to not have science. I think I would want, like Cynthia said, the surgeon who's operating on me to have some component of that knowledge, but I also want them to know or practice in such a way that that isn't overtaken by science. And I think sometimes like nurses and doctors are missing that piece of reading and understanding the patient amidst the knowledge that we might have about them in their medical history or otherwise.
Great. That really helps with firsthand experience dealing with these things in the field. Saba.
Just wanted to remind you that this reference to finding the right measure has a clear precursor in the practical philosophy of Aristotle, in the idea of phronesis. And there is in the practical philosophy of Aristotle an important point concerning the sort of balance that might be a topic here, because for Aristotle, the problem of the phronesis is to decide or to consider various, so more than one aspects, and I think that it's important, or it would be important if we want to elaborate this idea of for example, political action as balance, that there are several aspects that should be considered, and then we would need to clarify exactly which aspects are involved in such a balance. Otherwise, it seems to remain a bit too formal. So I think that the opposition between the two kind of measurements is on one hand quantifiable or mathematically describable domains or fields, and then other fields which need at least a sort of facultative judgment, if you want a Kantian language, or something similar. So to decide or to find certain levels or measures that are not quantifiable in any mathematical language. That would be my suggestion to that.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. Yeah. John Garner?
Thank you. I just wanted to contribute to that as well. Another aspect of that distinction that he makes between quantity and quality, between the appropriate and the meter ruler in Paris or whatever. He talks about this notion of objectivity is standing against and resisting at the bottom of page 114, and he contrasts that very interestingly to me with removing resistance, which occurs, which he seems to want to align that move where you're removing the resistance that the disease presents to some kind of natural tendency that the organism wants or something like that. is a very different move from the mastery that's involved with the setting of the rule, the meter ruler. And I'm just wondering if anybody had anything further to say on that distinction, on bringing in the removal of resistance as opposed to the imposition of a measure, and mastery as opposed to getting out of the way of something and letting it carry itself through.
Yeah, how about that? Does anyone want to? John, you want to speak to that, or is something else on your mind?
I had something else on my mind.
Okay, let's see if someone else wants to speak to that before.
Speaking off of John, what you were saying, that brings me back to what Haley and I were talking about earlier about the very last, not the very last line, but the last paragraph of that kind of getting out of the way, to forget yourself, right? Allows you to get out of the way, or like the questions that grasp you, instead of thinking of the questions as your own power that you're using to control your investigation of a subject matter, that the questions occur to you, and that's a function of you getting out of the way so that the subject matter can speak to us. Something like that.
Mhm.
Does that relate to what you were?
I think that helps because it might get back to this question of how the concept can speak, as opposed to, yeah. So I kind of see where you're going
Mhm.
with that move.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks, John Beach. You want to go ahead now?
Sure. It's concept and word, but I'm just thinking of this sort of ironic sort of, I guess it's a rhetorical question. Like, what would Heidegger say if you said, "Is being a concept or a word?" Like, how would he respond to that? See, the thing is, we're talking about reality or being all the time, and whether I mean, but that cannot be separated from language. This is the fact. The instrumental view of language is we could separate reality from language. We can use it as a tool, but no, we can't. Gadamer says no. Language is nothing but a medium. There can be no thinking without language. There can be no reality without linguistic sort of presence. And so this is getting lost, I think, in our sort of which tool is the best, is the good tool and the bad tool here to use, and so I just thought, and how many books did Heidegger write about the meaning of beginning, like on incipience? How many lecture courses? How many years did he talk about being? Is that a word or like it's just it's not it's and it is the word beginning, that Eric, to answer your question, that and of course that's a response to Heidegger's concept of beginning. Should there be a new beginning, second beginning, and blah blah blah, and finally, I would just say that with regard to this idea of health, this is the very concept of ecological balance. It is like, is the patient going to die? Is the patient planet Earth going to die because we've destroyed the balance of its health to sustain its unity and its ongoing existence as an organism? Just as any society will die when the balance of the just is destroyed. It will not continue. It will disintegrate. And that's why Hegel says, the real is the rational, and rational is the real, because the rational maintains itself in over the long term, and that's balance, that's justice, that's proper measure. All that to me is connected, and it begins with the Greeks.
Okay, thanks, John. I wanted to say one thing that struck me about is talk about balance before we sort of work on sort of the final thoughts people have. And that is on page 116, where he goes straight from talking about measure to balance. He talks about, in German, you talk about somebody being measured. I think we could say that too. We would know what that means, right? It's someone who has a certain sort of balance. They have a sense of appropriateness. But he specifies in the next sentence that the balance is between open-mindedness on one hand and peace within oneself on the other hand, which is not the first contrast I would think of when I was thinking about someone who has a sense of appropriateness, that they're balancing open-mindedness and peace within themselves. I suppose the idea is balancing, maybe this is what Shaba is saying, is balancing sort of looking at other perspectives, understanding other positions, trying to take in different possibilities, and being at peace with the decision you are making and your own insights, or something like that. But I thought that was, I'm not sure I have a clear answer to that, but I thought that was really interesting. The interesting poles that we're trying to balance.
What's the German that's being translated as peace with oneself? And is that what?
It's a hyphen phrase, in sich Ruhe. In oneself peace. In sich Ruhe. Okay, we've only got a few minutes left, and what Shaba, what I like to do at the end is if there's things that you were waiting to come up or that got tabled that you were just dying to talk about, that you'd be disappointed if this discussion ended and we didn't get to it, now is the time. So Eric, on cue, go ahead.
I have one on page 115. He uses the word Philistine as a contrast to an expert. What is a Philistine? Isn't that like deriving from Palestinian? Isn't that where the word comes from?
I don't know. It's used in the arts for somebody who's unsophisticated. All right, someone's a Philistine is somebody who just is not very sophisticated about the arts.
Yeah,
but right.
Yeah, no, and I remember a lot of Kierkegaard's translations have that as the bad guy, basically.
Yeah, the simpleton. Yeah, there's probably an ugly history there, Eric.
I guess I just kind of wrote in the margins, I'm like, I'm probably a Philistine.
Yeah, you probably are. No, I'm just kidding.
I don't think you're a Philistine, Eric.
No, I do not Philistine. But I think that's what he has in mind. Other things that you want to make sure we get a chance. Eddie, yes, what have you got?
Just a quick note on the Philistine. Doesn't it have to be the case that to be a Philistine, you reject any kind of inclinations or approach towards knowledge and wisdom? That you just, not only do you not contemplate about what actually matters, but more importantly, you reject yourself away from contemplating what's important. You say, this doesn't matter, I don't care, philosophy sucks. It's that kind of thing that characterizes a Philistine, right?
Yeah, it's not just ignorance, but a refuse to recognize the value of knowledge or.
Yeah, so it's a constant refuse of knowledge.
Yeah, good. I like it. I like it. Any other last thoughts?
Well, I just wanted to, can I say really quickly, that's why it's sort of strange to me when he says that they claim to be an expert. The Philistine in his example claims to be an expert. I don't normally associate that with that term. So.
I have an answer. There are people, I've heard Gadamer use this expression, that know everything about everything. And that's the opposite of the Socratic that knows that you knows your ignorance. And the Philistine doesn't, and this is what's so important. And I think it's so important to that just point that David just made too, about the inner sense of peace and so on, but it has to do with openness and knowing our ignorance. And that's why you learn. That's why philosophy is based on questions. That's why it's not something that we control or we invent. So does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah, sure. It makes sense. I just noticed Karen put something in the. Karen, do I get to call you up here again, or is it in the?
Yeah, actually, I think this is really interesting. So as I was typing, Eric was actually typing the opposite, which is perhaps interesting, because I thought, okay, if the Philistine always knows it better, that's the person who is way too at peace with himself and isn't open-minded to influences from outside. Yeah. But just as I was typing, Eric said the opposite, someone who's not open-minded and not at peace with themselves. So yeah, I don't know how to.
Well, I was thinking not at peace with themselves in a, like they're lying to themselves, not they feel anxious. It's that the way that they alleviate their anxiety is by inauthenticity or idle talk, whatever, right? Like, so I think I'm more in agreement with, I think you said it way better than what I was thinking. Yeah.
Okay, last call for things from the text to discuss.
For real
on the
peace, you
table.
should read Gadamer.
A plug for Gadamer. And you should read Ancients because you can't understand Gadamer without understanding the Greeks, right, John?
I know that's jarring. I know that's
No.
but
But then don't we have to read Heidegger to understand Gadamer, and then read Hegel to understand Heidegger? And
Yeah, get to
does it
work.
have
yeah,
to-
yeah, yeah.
Yep.
I think so. I think
Oh.
so. And Heidegger is so important. And although Gadamer disagrees with a lot of Heidegger, a lot of it he just assumes that we know because we've read Heidegger and it's incorporated. And he says, I don't have to tell it to you again because you've read Heidegger, you know this. I think there's a lot of that in Gadamer, although he uses his own language. And I think the relation between Gadamer and Heidegger is the relation between Plato and Aristotle. Grab that. How's that for?
There we go. How's that for a big bomb at the end?
Yeah.
Thanks, John, for ending